Thank you, Lucy, for joining me today. So we met last month at PharmaPack, as you remember, and you gave a presentation on inclusive design in device packaging. And you gave an interesting example, which I know we'll talk about in a minute, but I thought we'd kind of kick off the interview. Well, actually, you can introduce yourself first, and then we'll dive in.
Of course. Thanks, Liz. Thanks for having me back after Pharma Pack, and it was good to meet you there. I'm Lucy Baldwin. I work for a product design consultancy called Ensera Design, and we're part of a wider manufacturing group called Ensera. And I head up our user research and design strategy team. And really, our role is to make sure that when we're designing products and services, particularly that are going to be used in healthcare, that they meet the needs of the users they're intended for.
Awesome. Going back to your presentation and kind of what you do, why the strong focus on inclusive design? And is this a new thing? I've been hearing about this a lot and, just wondering why the strong focus?
I think historically, inclusive design has not got the attention it deserves. And what we essentially mean by all we mean by inclusive design is designing something that it's usable and a good user experience for the broadest possible spectrum of people living in our society. And I think it's quite interesting contract. It's quite an interesting construct to think about people being disabled by society in the way it's designed, rather than disabled because of anything to do with them as an individual and their physical cognitive characteristics. So just trying to think about what are those different physical and cognitive situational and circumstantial characteristics that make a person who they are as an individual. What does that mean for what they need, and how do we design to support that? In terms of like the shift, certainly medical device design, a lot of regulation is built upon this idea of a predicate medical device. So if there's something substantially equivalent already on the market, you just have to prove that your device is equivalent to it and performs. But that doesn't mean that that device that was originally put on the market was designed inclusively. It doesn't. It means that it was tested on a population of people. It doesn't mean that that population of people represented the needs of the people that actually use the device. So we just try to, when we're designing inclusively, think with the conditions we're looking at. Let's say it's diabetes, as it was in this case. What are some
Mhm.
physical or cognitive characteristics that someone with diabetes might also have an experience, such as sight loss,
Sure.
neuropathy, and how do we design to make their experience just as great as someone who's got 20/20 vision?
Yeah, sure. And in fact, going to your presentation, talking about a diabetes device, you mentioned a reusable auto injector project. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about, why that project, why it was so important, why the change from a disposable, right, preloaded to reusable auto injector product.
So the change from a disposable to a reusable product was really the reason for that was driven by AstraZeneca, and it was around a sustainability decision to move to that reusable product. So that wasn't actually the reason for that wasn't from an inclusivity standpoint, but there was a really important recognition that through changing that protocol where people had got used to a disposable device and then had to move to a reusable one, that was quite a significant change. And so how could we, through inclusive design approaches, redesign the packaging to make that transition more user friendly for people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's great. And I was going to ask too about balancing sustainability and user friendliness, right? And there's a lot of things to consider when creating a device. So, I guess how do you balance everything that you have to with regulations, sustainability goals, obviously user experience and safety?
It's a great question, and there are so many different dimensions to think about when it comes to sustainability. Um, and I guess one thing we always think about, for some people, sustainability is a meaningful driver. But in healthcare, in medical devices, someone doesn't choose to use an insulin pen. They don't choose to take insulin every day. They have
Sure.
to as part of their condition. So if we're gonna make something more sustainable, it better be just as good as what they're using already, or a better experience for them, and ideally needs to give them some other advantage. So when we design sustainably, we try and think about what that advantage is that it's giving from a user perspective as well. Some people, yes, sustainability is a driver for them, but not for everyone, and not when it's something that
Mm.
you have to use day in, day out. So that as a consideration. I think another really interesting lens to put on it is if something isn't user friendly for the population that need to use it for a diverse population, it in a way it isn't sustainable
Yeah.
because they're not going to use it in the way that it's designed to be used. They're not going to maintain it. It might go to waste. So there's that also flip side to think about, which is quite nuanced, but often
Yeah, of
gets
course.
missed.
I thought you said something interesting in PharmaPack. You said that deep research is necessary into the user's experience and their pain points. So, how did you research that for this device?
Yeah, exactly. And by deep research, so a really a traditional route to approval would be to do a formative study, and it would be in quite a research environment. So it might be in a room a bit like the one I'm in now, which is the backside of a viewing facility, and there might be a one-way mirror. You might have people watching in the background, and you've got
Okay.
some devices out, and you're getting people to compare them. So it's quite an artificial environment. It's really important because you're getting someone to go through task-based steps of how to use a device and making sure that they can do that safely, effectively. What it doesn't give you is any context into that person's life beyond what you
Yeah.
room that they've come into for the day. And so, what gives really large value, and what we did on this study was get contextual research. The way we did it on this study is via remote diary studies. So, we used a platform called Inkling. People can add an app to their phone, to their tablet, to their laptop, enables them to answer questions remotely and supply video diaries to show you kind of where they store their medication, how they're
Yeah, you
administering the
mentioned people's
medication.
maybe you didn't say messy, but refrigerators, right? Like a real life on the counter at dinner, like very real life use cases instead of a sterile, environment that you maybe want them to be using. That's not the real life case.
It's not, and it's super easy. I think in if you're working in a big medical device company, a pharmaceutical company, it's really, I think, hard to. It's easy to be quite removed from the end user in real life, but it doesn't exist in a sterile vacuum. It does exist in a kitchen where there's food prep going on.
Mhm.
We saw people who had their chopping boards out with like a dirty knife and some onions being chopped, and right next to it is the insulin vial about to be loaded. And so we've got to think about those constraints. We've got cupboards filled with not just one medication. Lots of people have got lots of different conditions. They're
Yeah,
probably taking some vitamins, supplements as well. Everything mixed in, and so usability in terms of finding the right medication, getting that out, putting it away again, etc.
sure. Yeah, of course. So you mentioned, moving from the disposable to reusable. How did secondary packaging help transition that change for end users? Or did it? Did it play a part in that?
It did, yeah. It did. It was really around in terms of like aiding the transition, it was around having a overlapping design language. So mechanisms people were used to, like the type of tamper seal, how to open and close, where the vase would be stored, where the pen would be stored, kind of mimicking as far as possible what was happening. So obviously with the disposable pens, they'd be multi dose, but one disposable pen, and then with the new device it'd be a single device and lots of different vials of insulin to be loaded. So there were more items actually in the
Okay.
pack in terms of opening, closing mechanisms, the shape of the box, color to aid and guide, just following that identity system through was really key.
And now we didn't talk about this, and hopefully you have and some insights on it. But like, were the end users given any kind of reason as to why, as far as like, hey, it's more sustainable to do it this way? Just wondering if like, do you see that buy-in from the end user? Are they excited to have something more sustainable, or do you think it's really not on their mind? They're too, preoccupied with their care and with their medicine.
I think it totally depends. I think that story is often shared. I
Hmm.
can't guarantee it was shared with every patient for this particular
Yeah.
product. Is often motivating and exciting to people, and they do want to do something more sustainably. I remember, is it okay to talk about another project?
Yeah, of course.
We did a really interesting project with a company called Ekin looking at stamer bags. And with stamer bags, often people are changing those multiple times a day, and they're not at the moment, in the vast majority of cases, they're not recyclable, they're not reusable. And there were lots of people talking about the waste and how
Hmm.
conscious they were of that and how they wanted impact. So people are kind of hungry and excited for that
Yeah.
change. But also, I think we can't under we can't underestimate how much of a change for some people that is. Like it's already,
Hmm.
I think for lots of people, like a big adjustment to live with a medical condition, perhaps especially if they're recently diagnosed or they've got cognitive characteristics that
Sure.
impact them day to day. We've got to think about like balancing that user experience with sustainability in terms of how we design. We can't ever be putting something out there that is a subpar experience or worse than the current experience,
Yes.
in order to
Yep.
be more sustainable. I feel that that is not justified in healthcare.
Yes, I agree. I think maybe with some other industries you almost can, and and it's okay, especially if it's
Yeah,
a very
yeah.
limited use product, that maybe doesn't have as much importance, but of course in the medical healthcare field it's very, very different. I have family that receives, shipments of biologics and they're always talking about wanting to be able to reuse or send back, it just so I only ask that because, it is top of mind for some patients, which is neat to see. I'm just wondering, like, how much more that will kind of change the industry from a sustainability standpoint.
I think my view is, and I've heard this from a lot of pharmaceutical leaders, is there's lots of appetite in the industry to do things like take back schemes for things like
Yes.
auto injectors, and design for disassembly, so something can be disassembled and the parts recycled or used afterwards. And the challenge comes with the fact that you're dealing with um, bodily substances is one challenge, and
Oh,
two,
sure.
yeah. So there are regulations around what can and can't be done,
Yes.
and what you can reconstitute something into. So it's not like a situation where you've got a PET bottle and you
Yeah.
can recycle that into a new PET bottle. Like you could never, we can't really do that with an auto injector,
Hmm.
because of the fact that it's a medical device, because it is going to interact with the body. Um, However, there are kind of ways that things can be reconstituted and recycled into different types of products and materials. But as I was saying, like lots of our clients have said, it really needs lots of different pharmaceutical organizations coming together,
Yeah.
to agree on a take back scheme that everyone sponsors, because it's no good if just one platform does it, and but they
Hmm.
only accept certain types of water injectors. So unless you're on that one as a patient, you can't use it because it's just not. We go back to the same thing. It's really makes it really challenging for the end user, for the patient,
Right.
um, in terms of actually recycling.
Yeah, of course. So you mentioned risk in your presentation, when talking about developing devices. So what type of risk are you talking about? A failed project, a user error, risking the end experience, or safety for the patient, or is there more? Or am I way off?
You're absolutely in the right ballpark. I guess there are lots of elements or aspects or dimensions of risk. One is about the user. Well, so we'll start with the user. There's making sure something is safe for the user, that they understand how to use it. And then there's also making sure something's a good user experience for it. And they can be two like different things. So something can be safe for someone to use, but they don't enjoy using it or they still find it challenging to use.
Hmm.
So I think that's one aspect to it. And we find that a lot of, at the moment, a lot of devices reach the market having gone through regulatory approval, um, and they still get recalled because
Mm.
they fail because they have, and that means that they've failed because they've been dangerous, like they've endangered someone's life as a result of using them. So at the moment, things still unfortunately get through that aren't safe. So a lot of it is about doing diligent research and really understanding your population to kind of try to eliminate that. On top of that, you want it to be a good user experience. So I give quite a nice example of project that R&IB did. They developed this concept. Someone asked them the question of their pregnancy test. A blind person can use a standard pregnancy test, but to use a standard pregnancy test, they need somebody else to read the result to them.
Okay.
So they can use a pregnancy test. It's safe for them to use it, but can they use it with dignity in the way they want to? Is it a good user
No.
experience?
Yeah.
No.
Right.
So RNIB developed this concept so that a blind person could independently use a pregnancy test. So that's that thing of like,
Yeah.
yeah, safe user experience, but a good user experience that's equal for different people with different needs. That's another layer.
Wow, that's so interesting. I haven't thought
Yeah.
about that from, that type of product. Yes, they can use it, but right, but can they do it within the privacy that they want? Maybe not. So,
Yeah, and it's a really interesting thing to think about, Liz. Like there are lots of other medical devices, like an auto injector is a great example of like if you think about someone who's blind, can they use it? I don't know. Like that would be
yeah.
challenging. And so, like
Hmm.
I think asking ourselves more challenging questions as an industry and as an industry of designers and creators
Yeah.
about who we're designed for and what they need and can they use it safely? One question. Can they use it in the way that they want to that delivers a good
Yeah.
experience? Different question.
Yeah. And independently, I think that's a
Independently.
huge, a huge factor.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I think if you layer on things like we are as a society an aging population and the birth rate is declining, as we get older, a lot of us will have developed characteristics that make us less independent.
Hmm.
And so we probably do need to rethink the way we're designing lots of things to promote independence for as long as possible in people's
Yeah.
lives. Um,
Um, yeah, go
sorry.
ahead. I was going to switch gears, but if you have something else, go ahead.
I was just going to talk about the other element of risk that was important to us in this,
Perfect.
which impacts the way we did things, which was not so much around the end user experience, but was around will this design behave in the ways we think it will when it's actually manufactured. And
Mhm.
so for that, we created physical prototypes, but we also did finite element analysis. So what that essentially means is we took we were using or proposing a new material for packaging, and we didn't know how that would behave. So we prototyped it, modeled it, simulated that model in kind of a digital reality, and that enabled us to put it through more complex and difficult tests to mimic what would be happening in real life in like transportation and so on and so forth or storage and to make sure it would perform under those pressures. So it was also around like design, like reducing risk in design to manufacture, given we had a tight
Yeah.
turnaround and making sure that what we spec'd out actually performed and there weren't going to be some problems once we got into manufacture.
Yeah, I can imagine that's a huge issue if you do run into problems, right? Once you start manufacturing large volumes of a device
It's
that,
a lot more to fix.